And your life.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that all the viewers out there have settled in with popcorn and something cold to drink. Welcome to the 17th Senate District Democratic primary debate with candidates George Cabrera and Justin Farmer. I'm New Haven Independent Hamden reporter Sam Gerwitt, and I'll be hosting tonight's debate with Eugene Driscoll, who is editor of the Valley Independent Sentinel. Our WNHH radio station manager, Harry Drost, will be keeping time. You will each have 1 minute to respond to each question, and then there won't be a second round of answers. If the person who answers the second time, or answers the question second, makes an accusation of the other candidate or brings up something new, then the first speaker will get a 15-second response. And then if either Eugene or I want to clarify something, we can also ask for a 15-second follow-up. When you have 10 seconds left, you will hear this one beep. And when your time is up, you will hear this. Now, I'll just introduce the candidates briefly, and I should say these are descriptions that came from the campaigns. As a union organizer and workers' rights advocate, George Cabrera has been fighting for working families in the district and across the country for more than 25 years. Currently, George serves as the director of organizing for the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 919. He was one of the leaders during the historic Stop and Shop strike in 2019. After the corporation threatened the health care of over 35,000 workers across New England, George led grocery workers on a large scale. George and his wife, Rebecca, a public school principal, live in Hamden with their twin 15-year-old sons, George Jr. and Gabe, both of whom attend Hamden Public Schools. Justin Farmer is a 25-year-old activist elected official, and for him, the issues he champions are personal. Justin was first diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome at age 17. It's why he wears the noise-canceling headphones. After years of fighting and advocating for himself in a system that can often leave our students most in need without critical help or resources, Justin quickly realized that the issues he faces are systemic and did not stop with education. Justin pounded the pavement for his first city council race at age 22 and is currently serving his second term. Justin is now looking to take his experience fighting for underrepresented communities to the state Senate to fight for workers, families, the Valley Fire School, economic development, a modernized and reliable Waterbury line, brownfield remediation, and more. Justin is not just a champion on these issues, he is engaged in the solutions on a personal level. Eugene and I flipped a coin earlier, and we got that George will answer the first question first. And before we ask the first question, just, I think, reminder to keep microphones muted when you're not speaking. So Eugene, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It's an honor to do this. First question. As of 2019, according to the DECD website, Ansonia is the most economically distressed city in Connecticut. Derby, where I live, is number 5. What specific steps will you take to foster economic development in those communities? Mr. Cabrera, you're up first.
Thank you so much. First, thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to the Valley Independent Indy and the New Haven Independent for hosting this. Thank you to Councilman Farmer also for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in Derby and Ansonia talking to folks on the ground about economic development. One of the very first things I'm going to do, if I'm lucky enough to be elected state senator 7th, is convene a meeting of all the Valley leaders, especially in Derby and Ansonia, to talk through what are some projects that are priorities for them. And I intend to make that a priority for myself in the state Senate, to develop an agenda, whether it's widening the Route 34 corridor, making sure we do something with a lot of the empty and derelict buildings in the Valley, working with organizations like TEAM, making sure that we don't lose assets like we just currently did the YMCA in Ansonia, just working with local leaders and making sure we develop a plan and an agenda.
Okay. Thank you. And the same question to Justin. Go ahead.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you for putting this on. In terms of what we need to do, we need to tackle brownfields. Governor Lamont just came down and gave bonding to knock down a dilapidated building. But it's so much more deeper than that. When you have a generational deficits and you have these factories that have caused tons of environmental devastation, you have to be able to clean them up and remediate them before you can even talk to developers. Second thing we have to do is we have to work on transportation. We don't have transportation connecting our ring suburbs and inner cities to the valley, then we're not going to get commerce. And the only way that we can do that then is relying on the state or giving out handouts to developers by saying that they don't have to pay taxes.
Okay. Thank you. On to the next question. Again, it's to you both. There's a strong feeling in the Lower Valley that it's overlooked by state government, that it's both a rust belt and a flyover area between New Haven and Bridgeport. Neither of you live in the Valley, but Senator Logan lives in Ansonia. So I'm wondering, how are you appealing to voters in Ansonia and Derby specifically? And Mr. Farmer, this one is to you first.
Thank you. Yeah, many of the issues are the same for me. Where I live, plenty of factories have left. Generational deficits exist. Blight is a real thing. Over-criminalization is a thing. Lack of opportunities aren't there. I'm just talking about the experiences that I know and that I've grown up with that are very similar. These are disenfranchised communities that the state is not living up to their agreements to fully fund. So for me, the connection is personal, just saying, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know what it's like to talk to representatives that don't represent you. And in fact, I ran because I have that same concern and feeling. So that is how I'm, making those connections with community members, is talking about the issues where I know what having that pothole is like.
Okay, thank you. And the same question to Mr. Cabrera.
Thank you. The way I've been doing this is, for the last 2 years almost, I have been spending lots of time in Ansonia and Derby on the ground, talking to people, learning about the issues that affect the Valley specifically. A couple of things I would say right off the bat. One is that we really need to work hard to make sure that the people's voices are part of the development that goes on in Ansonia and Derby. And what I've done, last summer, I spent time electing Democrats to the city council, making sure that we have good, progressive, working class voices on the city council, and making sure that people's voices are heard. And I think also is just making sure that I talk to as many people as possible. And that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I haven't gone away. The Valley has been great to me. I have family there, I have friends there, and I intend on spending more time there, listening and learning about what can be done. And I think what I think about also in the Valley is that I see my family and my parents also.
Okay, thank you. To you, Sam.
Yes. Another question for both of you. If you were in the Senate, first, in one word, would you vote to limit governmental immunity as the Senate is discussing right now as we speak? Also, another yes or no question, would you advocate for civilian review boards in the towns in the district? And then what else do you want to see in the way of police reforms?
And that one is to Mr. Cabrera to start.
Okay, thank you. Excellent question. It's a complicated issue, but it's one that we have to take very seriously. And like many of you, I've seen the mass movements across this country and even here in Connecticut. We have to acknowledge the fact that Black Americans have experiences as a law enforcer that a lot of us simply don't. That's why we have to reform policing. We have to reform public safety. And a lot of these situations that we send law enforcement into, they're ill-equipped and don't have the skills to deal with, where it would make more sense to send a social worker in or a mental health provider. And I think that has to begin with accountability and transparency. We must rebuild trust between the community and law enforcement. And this bill, I think, takes one bold step to make that more of a reality.
I'm going to ask for a 15-second follow-up. Just want to clarify, is that a yes on voting for limiting governmental immunity, and what about civilian review boards?
Yeah, definitely civilian review boards are really important. I believe this bill includes that, which is very important. And I think also the bill that's being voted on today in the Senate does deal with that. My understanding is it doesn't eliminate qualified immunity, but it does.
But reforms
it. Yeah, I also I would refer you also to a statement that I put out on this bill a couple of days ago.
Thank you. And Justin, same question.
Yes. And yes, I'll speak plainly on it. I have fought over the last 5 years for civilian review boards, not only in my own community, but across the state. We often talk about community policing. We need to involve the community in the process. It is clear that when the community is front and foremost, we will be able to combat the issues that systemic racism and institutional racism play out. Sunday was 30 years since the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, was passed. It's not just Black people, it's not just brown people, it's disabled people, and it's people that are most marginalized, whether they're trans or so forth, that are affected by police brutality. Lastly, we need to strengthen laws around police seizing people's property and damaging it.
Thank you. Hamden's police force has its lowest level of staffing since 1982. Should police forces in Hamden and in the rest of the 17th district be defunded, and if so, to what degree? And Justin, you take this one first.
Yeah, having more police in the past is not evidence to have more police now. I am for an approach of regionalization. I've had the conversation over the last years talking about how we should have more county police where we share police departments. Woodbridge might not have a call all day long, where Hamden, the southern part of town where I live, we had 2 shootings in the last 2.5 weeks. So we need to be smart about how we're deploying police officers and where they are. But the idea of having more police because they had more in the past, that's economically, that's not where we are. We don't have that funding, and it's also not the smartest way to build community trust when you're talking about communities that share borders and share culture and share perspectives. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. And Justin, I think you cut out for just a moment. Did you cut out to other? Okay, never mind. Right now, rules of police discipline are established in police union collective bargaining agreements, which trump town ordinances and charters. Would you consider changing state?
Sam, can I just interrupt for 1 second? I don't think Mr. Cabrera got a chance to answer the last question. It went to Justin. I think it's got to go back to him before we move on.
Thank you, Eugene. Yes.
No problem. I'm
George.
Go ahead. I mean, that's all right. No worry. It happens. So my approach to this is comprehensive. I think there's definitely a case to be made that we should be spending more public dollars in communities, especially underdeserved communities, whether it's social programs or whether it's investing more in mental health support, investing more in our schools. This has to be a comprehensive approach in order to really begin to solve and to deal with a lot of these challenges. I grew up in an inner city, and we didn't have the best schools. We didn't have the safest streets. We didn't have the same kind of after-school programs. And we had activists in my neighborhood. I come from a family of activists. My uncle fought for having after-school programs support system. I think it's about prioritizing where we spend tax dollars, making sure that we're actually supporting communities and creating an environment for the people who live there.
Thank you. And now on to that question. Right now, rules of police discipline are established in police union collective bargaining agreements, which trump town ordinances and charters. Would you consider changing state law to strip that authority from police unions so that the state legislature would establish best practices to govern the conduct of police officers in the street and disciplinary procedures? And George, you answer this one first.
So I believe collective bargaining is important, and I think that you have to be able to work with representatives of any body, any union, to make sure obviously you don't want things in collective bargaining agreements that shield bad actors who do bad things. You want transparency. So I think that these are very important things. And I said earlier on, transparency and accountability are the key pillars for me in making sure, whether it's in union contracts or whether it's in public policy, those are the two important things that I would look forward to making sure that we push. But I think also that there has to be a partnership approach to this, and making sure that we have the transparency and accountability we need, but also making sure that workers' rights are protected. That's something I've dedicated my entire life to, is to make sure that workers have a voice on the job. So I would have to be able to balance both of those things.
And Justin?
Yeah, there needs to be oversight. The legislature already has oversight in the sense that we make laws, and the fact that Post, creates training for police in a broad sense. I am in favor of putting community at the forefront. That's why I've talked about civilian review boards. Each community is different, and to take away from that process and to not allow communities to discuss how they want to see policing done, I feel you're stepping above that process first. So first it needs to go to the community, that local community, to figure out how they feel about an issue. And then if it's a systemic issue like police chases, it needs to come to the legislature, and we need to make legislation. The people closest to problems are closest to the solutions.
Okay. Moving on. This question is for Justin Farmer specifically. Justin, how do you respond to mainstream or centrist Democrats in Derby and Ansonia who look at your endorsement, say, by the Democratic Socialists of America and say, well, that's too far left for me. I'm not ready for that. How do you respond to that statement?
Yeah, I'm unapologetic about my truth. I'm never going to lie to people. I'm never going to double talk. We have enough politicians that do that. I am here to convince people on my issues. You always vote your district. You always vote your conscience. So for me, being honest with people, there have been people's doors who have knocked on who are telling me flat out, I am voting for Trump. And by the end of that conversation, I have their trust and respect because I was honest with them. We need to bring integrity back to politics. So that's where I stand, is that I'm going to be unapologetic fighting for healthcare. I'm going to be unapologetic fighting for the environment. I'm going to be unapologetic fighting for them. I'm going to be unapologetic fighting for in-state college tuition, so on and so forth. And if I need to talk and have community forums to convince people, I will do that.
Okay, I have one 15-second follow-up, if you will. We're talking about sort of defunding the police, and I know this is a Democratic primary, but in 2016, if I remember correctly, 61% of my neighbors voted for President Trump. And so I guess, Justin, how do you convince, do you think you have a chance in the general election, I guess is sort of what I'm saying here, considering how conservative, for lack of a better word, the Valley is?
Of course I have a chance. I am a Black disabled man wearing headphones. If I didn't have a chance, I wouldn't be on the ballot. And I've done that. So I think I have that ability and capacity to talk to voters and win them over.
Thank you. And then Mr. Cabrera, is there anything else you wanted to add? That question was for Justin, but you each get a minute.
I would just add that I have. I received over 18,000 votes in the last election when I ran, and the Valley was very supportive. I spent the last 2 years in the Valley working with other candidates, getting them elected to office. What I hear on the doors is people want some basic things. They want to know that they can have one job to support their family and put food on the table. They want to make sure they have good health care in case, God forbid, they ever get sick, and they want to make sure the kids have an opportunity to succeed. That's it. That's the work I've been doing for 25 years. It's the work that will continue to do in the state Senate. And these are people that I know, the people that I've gotten to know more so in the last 2 years. And the short answer is, the way I appeal to them is I already have, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you. Now it's back to Sam.
And this question is for you specifically, George. People criticize you for not taking a strong stance on some specific policy issues, and for sometimes being vague about which specific pieces of legislation you would support. The campaign platform you have online is shorter and doesn't go into as much detail as the one on Justin's website. How do you respond to that critique?
Well, part of what has to be realized here is when you're an elected official, a lot happens. I worked in the legislature. I was a legislative aide for the Speaker of the House, first female Speaker of the House. And that experience taught me that legislation and policy are constantly changing. There's various iterations. There's lots of debates. There's lots of different interest groups involved. And so you have to be careful and responsible to make sure that you express your values. And sometimes you have to really keep your eye on how that legislative process moves. And the reality is that sometimes you can start with a particular piece of legislation and at the end it's completely different, or it's not faithful to what the title of the bill is, or it doesn't really address the issues. So you have to be responsible. What I've done is I've outlined a set of values. My record speaks for itself. The last 25 years working in an intersection of workers' rights and all kinds of other issues with healthcare, education, and that's what I have to offer to the body politic.
Thank you. And Justin, you also get a minute to respond to this.
Yeah, we need people to actually express where they are. You vote your district, you vote your conscience. If you can't outline where you are on an issue, saying that, oh, the process will change, well, you set the standard. You set the moral standard and you tell people, this is where my line is on this. This is where I want us to see where we move. And every year, if you have to go back each session and fight for the added gains, that is our job. So our platform is full because, again, this is not just about me. This is about building a movement and teaching our youth to be able to advocate for themselves and learn the process. And that is very much what I've done from 22 to 25. My track record is not only building success for myself and my community, but teaching other young people how to do work.
Thank you, Justin. And I think you responded to George, so I'm going to give you 15 seconds to respond to Justin.
I have 25 years of experience doing this, and you have to be able to build coalitions and work with people. And the reality is, I'm not running to be dictator. I'm running to be state senator in the 17th district. When you get into that chamber, and I've done this, you've got to work with 100 people who all believe their issue is important. And what you want to do is outline a set of values, not veer from them, be faithful to them, but also be able to work with other people to get things done.
Time. As we approach the fall, schools are preparing to reopen, and districts are asking teachers to return to work, potentially exposing themselves to COVID-19. Is it fair to ask teachers to take that risk? Justin, you take this one first.
Absolutely not. And I'd add on to that, it's not just the teachers, it's the custodial workers, it's the school resource officers, it's the clinicians. There's so many people with wraparound services. If we want people to babysit kids, that's something different from educating our kids and preparing them for the future. We don't have the PPE we need for our teachers. We don't have proper ventilation in many of our schools. We don't have a thought out plan. The state and us as legislators should be thinking about a plan to make sure that we are taking care of students so that their parents can go back to work if it's safe. But our job is to make sure that they get a proper education, especially our students with special education needs. And we shouldn't have teachers juggling doing online classes and in-person classes. That's not fair to them. That's not the expectation for them. And we're asking people to put their lives at risk.
I want to ask for a 15-second follow-up here. Justin, are you saying that you don't support sending kids back to school and you think it should be all distance learning?
I don't feel at this time it is appropriate to open back up our schools when we don't have a plan and we're a month away from our school kids going back to school. I don't think it's appropriate. If we start later, great. But at this moment in this time, we don't have a plan.
Thank you. And George.
So I'm married to a public school teacher for 17 years and an administrator for 6. And so we've been talking about schools in my house for a very long time. And my wife's involved in some of the communication and conversation happening around possibly reopening. It is critical that the data drive the decisions on this. The number of infections, the number of hospitalizations, what we're seeing with contact tracing. I think every community is different, but I think that the most important thing for me is that teachers are at the table and part of the decision-making process, that parents are at the table, that the health and safety of all, especially our children, is utmost and a top priority. And I think that if we do those things, the right decision can be made. And in some cases, it may be a hybrid situation with some classroom time and some at-home time. So I'm a big believer in making sure the stakeholders are all at the table and that the science drives some of the decision-making process.
Since I gave Justin 15 seconds, I want to give you another 15 seconds just to clarify. You wouldn't say that you wouldn't say either way that you would or would not send kids back to school?
Again, based on what I'm seeing now, I wouldn't personally feel comfortable doing that. But again, we have a lot of school districts in this state, and we have to make sure that the safety of teachers and students and parents is of utmost importance. And that is the criteria that.
Thank you.
That buzzer is something, huh? All right. Moving on. This is to both candidates again, Ansonia and Derby. Ansonia and Derby government talk about regionalization a lot. Both struggle to fund education. Derby and Ansonia are talking about merging their school districts. Derby recently came out and said maybe we can send our high school kids to Shelton. Yeah, we still have separate police departments, fire departments, economic development directors, even sewer authorities. Are we at the point where the state should come down and force regionalization in the Valley and elsewhere? And it's Mr. Cabrera to start.
So I think there definitely is a case to be made that there needs to be some savings, and that places where there's repetition of services, especially, and things are being redundant, that there needs to be some savings there, right, and some collaboration. It's really important, however, for me that both Derby and Ansonia be involved in the decision-making process. They're the ones that are going to be most impacted by this. I am encouraged by some of the preliminary conversations that are happening, especially around consolidating some of the educational services. But it's really important that Derby and Ansonia be the ones that decide. They're the ones that are most impacted by this. So I believe that where there's savings, we should definitely explore that. And wherever the state can be helpful in doing that, whether it's procuring bonding money or facilitating conversations, we should be about that. But at the end of the day, Derby and Ansonia should be able to decide their own fate for themselves.
And just a quick follow-up. So if you were elected and a bill came forward saying we have to force Derby and Ansonia to move on some type of regionalization, you would vote no?
Depends. I'm not a big fan of forcing anyone to do anything. I think you make your case, you make your argument, but I think voters have to decide. I think that's really important. I don't think...
I meant in the state legislature. I'm sorry. If you personally, you would not force regionalization.
Again, you got to have Derby and Ansonia at the table, right? If you're able to convince them, and especially if I see savings and I see that it's beneficial, you make that case. But people have to decide their own fate. You can't, I'm not a big believer in really forcing people to do anything. That's really important to me. There's a case to be made. The case has to be made.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Farmer, I had asked, should the state at this point force regionalization in places like Derby and Ansonia that are struggling? What's your take?
No, the state should fund them. The Valley has been underfunded generationally. Whether you're talking about the fire school, whether you're talking about helping with bonding costs for like something like the Waterbury line, the Valley in general has been underfunded, and it's a community that's unique in Connecticut that readily fosters and has a spirit of regionalization. The Valley sees itself as one community already, speaks about their shared experience in such a way. So really, this is a deficit of the state not taking responsibility and not giving the resources it needs. It can't put the squeeze on smaller communities and tell them to figure it out when you're going to give Greenwich $136 million in municipal aid. Equality is great, but we need equity. And equity has been missing a long time in the Valley. And that is what I will be fighting for. Nothing short of that, nothing less. So that is my perspective.
And then in terms of, this is a follow-up for Justin, in terms of, Waterbury line needs money, the schools need money, the roads need money, everybody needs money. Where do you get this money? You've alluded to it, but how would you get the money to accomplish some of the things you just said? 15 seconds.
One of the things is fair taxation. Another thing is taxing tech giants and pharmaceutical companies. It's something that we can do, something that we don't do, and something that we need to do. We need to start thinking about smart ways to make revenue and bring it to communities first in need.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, next question for you both again. Mr. Farmer will give the first answer. The New Haven mayor recently wrote an op-ed calling for a, quote, segregation tax, unquote. It's levying, according to him, an additional property tax on every community that has a housing stock where less than 10% of the units are considered affordable. The less affordable housing and the wealthier the town, the higher the segregation tax. Tax would be used in places such as Derby and Ansonia, where we have the alliance districts as dictated by state education. Do you support that idea, Justin?
Yeah, on wholesale, no. It's one thing to say that we've been talking, 830G is legislation that's been talking about having 10% affordable housing in every community, yet it has no teeth. This is something I've worked on as an intern when I was at Planned Parenthood. We have communities that have generational degradation that have had baked-in racism to prevent housing. If you don't have the capital, you're telling communities that are smaller that they have to figure out how to do generational deficits without the tools and resources. Another thing that develops housing, it's the state funds that allow you to build affordable housing. If the state is serious about it, then they would stop giving private investors money, they would create a state bank, and they would prioritize affordable housing.
Okay, and then the same question to George on the mayor's idea of a segregation tax.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Councilman Farmer is right about the earlier point he made about the fact that the state just hasn't been funding towns and cities at the levels that it should be. That's a really important thing. That's something I intend on fighting for, whether it's our public schools or whether it's development dollars. We really need to do a better job of funding our towns and cities with municipal aid and ECS formula money as well. That's really important. I would have to see what that looks like, but I think you definitely need to do a better job with affordable housing, and I would be in favor of some kind of funding mechanism for towns who continue to resist the affordable housing part of our law, which many of them do, and find a way to make sure we get those funds for distressed communities, especially in Derby and Ansonia.
And then a follow-up on that, Mr. Cabrera. Sure. I always hear Ansonia, Derby schools are underfunded. What do you have in 15 seconds, how would you change that?
Well,
not exactly a 15-second question, but
yeah,
I asked it anyway.
Well, I think we need to prioritize people above corporations. I think I'm in favor of really looking at raising the top tax marginal rate on the income tax on the top 1% of wealthiest residents in the state of Connecticut. We have a lot of hedge funds in the state. I bet you we're not taxing them really. And also making sure that we close any loopholes and make sure that corporations are paying their fair share. That's really important.
Thank you. And now we're on taxes. So would you support a mansion tax, that is a statewide tax on properties assessed over a certain value? And would you also support a statewide property tax on all properties that would lower municipal tax burdens and smooth out inequities between mill rates in various municipalities? George, you go first.
So what I'm in favor is we clearly have a serious lack of equity in tax policy, right? What I would say is that the people at the top 1%, are not paying their fair share, and they need to. We also should be definitely exploring things like a mansion tax above a certain threshold. Obviously, the details matter on this stuff, but we have a lot of people in the state of Connecticut who are not paying their fair share. But we also need to make sure that we're supporting small and mid-sized businesses where most of our jobs come from. So for me, it's a comprehensive approach. Tax policy is a very big piece and a very big part of it. But we also need to get to a more equitable place with regards to school funding, access to good paying jobs, and all that goes together for me.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Are you open to a statewide property tax?
Depends what it looks like. We have to make sure we definitely are, part of the problem that we're having is we're not getting, a lot of towns are distressed. They're not getting enough municipal aid, enough public school money into the towns and cities. And then the towns and cities have really only one mechanism to make up for that gap, and that's the property tax, which is unfair and is aggressive. So yeah, I definitely want to explore something like that, but the details really do.
Thank you. Justin.
Yeah, no, I want to support a flat tax. You can call it whatever you want. That is essentially what it is. We should be fixing our taxing system. The fact that, people in Greenwich work in New York and then come home to Connecticut, that they get to scoot on taxes. A state tax is something that has been argued, taken out, argued about, put back in, taken back out. Millionaires passing on generational wealth, that is something that should be taxed. Our communities are connected. 61% of community members who live in the Naugatuck Valley travel outside to Waterbury, New Haven, neighboring towns for jobs. We need to be addressing pilot. We know our inner cities are not getting pilot. The jobs and commerce that connect to that are not there. And then when we don't have transportation, the values are not the same.
Thank you, Justin. Another follow-up. Are you saying you would support some kind of statewide tax that was not a flat tax?
As a municipal leader, we need to allow our municipalities to have more options on how to tax to bring in revenue. I wouldn't blanketly accept a flat tax that only hurts the poorest community and allows the richest communities to obfuscate their responsibility, which is to pay taxes.
Thank you. And this question is for you specifically, Justin. Hamden is wavering on the brink of a financial crisis, and many politicians and financial analysts say it is only a matter of time until the state steps in to take over its finances. Justin, you are one of those politicians, and you've advocated for giving up municipal control and letting the state take over the town's books. In some cases, as in Hartford and West Haven, state budget oversight has involved using state financial resources to help distressed municipalities, though of course that's not guaranteed, and we don't know if that would happen in Hamden. How would you justify using state resources and tax dollars from voters in the Valley to pay for Hamden's budget crisis?
Yeah, I have argued that if we as elected leaders can't get together and speak truth to power, that we should go to the MARB. For 20 years, we did not pay our pension. For 20 years, the state did not pay its pensions and levied that to the whole entire state of Connecticut, and we've been paying for it. Generational debt. So it's already happened. The Valley is paying for other people's deficits. It has been happening. And Hamden happens to be one of the larger municipalities. We're the 7th, 8th largest municipality. It's happening to us first, but there are plenty of communities it's going to happen to. Rising costs of healthcare is going to cripple many of our municipalities, and a balloon is going to hit us all. So the state needs to be real about addressing these discrepancies, but also leaders need to speak truth to power.
Thank you, Justin. I just want to give you a follow-up on that. How do you justify it to people in the Valley?
I justify it in the sense that when you have leaders who are unwilling to make the hard decisions, unfortunately, the state has to make those hard decisions. It's eventually going to happen to them as well. So hold your elected officials accountable now so that you don't have to go through that pain.
And George, how would you justify using state dollars to help get Hamden out of its financial troubles?
Well, first you have to be very diligent here, and you have to be very careful. There is no doubt that Hamden's financial position is weak and deteriorating every day. It's a difficult situation that we're in. I'm really focused on making sure that workers are held not harmed. That's really important. I think that you have to be able to bring the city council in and the mayor's office and other parties to try to figure out a way out of the financial difficulties that we had. It's a very big step to ask the state to come in, and it's a very serious step. And I would have to take the time to really look at that closely. I think Councilman Farmer is in a much better position to talk about that, having been sitting on the city council. So I definitely think it's a serious thing, and I don't want to make light of it. It's very, very important, and I would take a serious look at that, something like that. It'd be very hard. Honestly, you got to really think this through and make sure you bring all parties around.
Thank you. And George, this one's for you specifically. Legislators have managed to get concessions from state employee unions over the last several years to save the state money. For example, the legislature's the state has negotiated multiple tiers in the state employees retirement system, which is the pension plan for state employees, to lower the costs for the state.
Yeah.
The same has not been done for the municipal employees retirement system, which is the state-run pension plan for municipal employees. And Kurt Lang, the mayor of Hamden, has said that the state should do that and should enter negotiations with unions to create new tiers in the plan, which would save Hamden a lot of money in the future. As a labor leader, are you willing to sit on the other side of the negotiating table and ask unions for concessions in order to represent Hamden's interests?
Well, I've spent the last 25 years fighting and advocating for workers to make sure they have living wages, to make sure they have health care, to make sure they can retire with dignity and respect. I will be the last person to ask to do anything that hurts families and that hurts workers' pockets, their health care coverage, or their ability to retire. I think part of what we have here, and Councilman Farmer alluded to it earlier, is we have decades of neglect, whether it's in Hamden or whether it's at the state level, because our pensions at the state level are not in the best shape either, of people not living up to their promises, elected officials, politicians. And I'm a big believer that you hold harmless those most vulnerable. And it's high time that we ask those at the top to pay more. It's high time that we figure out a way to make corporations pay their fair share. But I will not be party to anything that hurts families and that breaks promises that were made when people took jobs that they knew brought them a sense of safety for their families.
So if Mayor Lang comes to you and says, George, we need you to champion creating new tiers in CMERS, in the municipal employees retirement system, what are you going to say to him?
When you ask me, I'll let you know. I don't know, Sam. Again, my values for 25 years have been protecting and fighting for workers. And it's going to be almost impossible for me to do anything that hurts families and hurts workers. And that's really how I see this. I understand difficulties. I understand that we need to solve these big problems, but I will not do it on the back of working men and women.
Thank you. And Justin, same question to you.
Yeah, I have never worked for labor, but I have a labor of love. I've organized with labor unions for the last 5 years, and very much part of the reason why I was radicalized. My mom was a CNA, insulted her workplace for worker rights. It's simple. No, we need to stop asking. If we're coming to the negotiation table in good faith, you can't say every 2 to 5 years we need money back when you aren't paying your other bills. It's that simple. We have people for decades not paying their bills, and they steal from the Green Fund and rob it. They steal from the Transportation Fund and rob it, and they don't pay the bills, and they don't invest in the ways that they need to have the cost savings, to invest in things, to pay down our debt. So I'll keep it simplistic. No.
Now, Justin, you have been advocating for making serious cuts in Hamden. And part of that involves asking for concessions from unions. So are you saying that in the state legislature, you wouldn't be willing to do the same?
I've asked for concessions from unions where the mayor has time and time again asked a particular bargaining unit, the police department. Every single labor union has come to the table. Our town employees, everyone has come to the table except for the police department. So that is who I've been asking to come to the table.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I keep getting calls from my fourth grader's friend knocking the script off, so I apologize. Bear with me 1 minute. Sorry. Sam, you might have to take this one because I can't answer the. I can't bring up the
I'll take this one.
Sorry.
In light of the lack of support from both the Senate Republicans and Governor Lamont, how would your election to the Senate advance the likelihood that the planned new rail cars and more frequent service on the Waterbury branch line would be approved? Justin, you start.
Yeah, I, as a community organizer, I've knocked doors for 68 candidates just to help out. So I have connections all throughout the state. To be an effective legislator, you need to make connections not only in your backyard, but across the state to get stuff done. I am a transit advocate. Many people know me in the transportation spaces. So this would be something that I would be championing. And as an activist elected official, if we can't come to the table, then I will make sure that our voices are heard in Hartford, whether that is a rally, whether that is a protest, or whether that is on the floor filibustering for a bill. I will make sure our voices are heard when it comes to transportational justice, because it not only affects houses, it affects health, and it affects job quality. So that's how I'd be an effective advocate.
Thank you. George.
The Waterbury train line is a very important project. This is something that I've been talking to Mayor Pete Hess in Naugatuck about for over 2 years now, as well as elected officials in Ansonia and Derby. It is a top priority. It could be a game changer for the valley, up and down. It could be a huge economic driver for the region, not just those particular towns, but for that entire region. And I think it's a top priority. It's very, very important. This is where I think my experience working in the legislature gives me a leg up, because I've been there. My job was to shepherd bills through the legislative process and work with the caucuses to get things done, work with, navigate the myriad groups to get things done. And this is something I have familiarity with, with my background, and also having a political science and government degree from Quinnipiac University that I'm, I think, well positioned to do in conjunction with working with coalitions on the ground, understanding the legislative process and getting it through the process. And that's part of the reason why we're still stuck on it, is we don't have elected officials with that skill set and who are willing to make a priority.
Thank you.
I believe, if I can get 15 seconds to respond, I believe something was pointed towards me.
Yes.
As a legislative advocate, working with coalitions, both Labor, Planned Parenthood, who's been in the building, testified on numerous bills, I have that experience. And while I'm still seeking my education, I've been able to effectively do that.
And what other investments do you think the state needs to make in public transportation? And how would you propose to fund them? And George, you take this one first.
I think, bus line is really important. I think, our transportation system is way behind. I think we need to really make busing easier for people to get around. That's a really important component. I think also our roads and bridges, we need to make sure that they're just not in good shape. We need to make sure that we stop raiding the transportation fund and make sure that we're able to have high quality roads and bridges to attract businesses and to make commutes easier and cheaper for everyone. So it'd be rail for me, it'd be bus, and then also making sure our roads and bridges are in top shape.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, we need to fund low carbon options. The state of Connecticut, for some reason, is married to the idea of these old box cars rather than these newer, lighter electric trains. So that's something that I would be advocating, pushing for. Something else you've seen in New York, where they have dollar vans to allow the main routes to be big buses and bus lines, and have the arteries be these smaller vehicles that are less energy reliant, and to be able to have more flexibility with our routes and spend that money and cost savings on things like bridges and roads, and also making sure that we can invest in a way to have our transportation move towards the 21st century.
Thank you. George, you have come out in support of a public option for healthcare in Connecticut. Justin, your campaign platform says that the state should explore a single-payer system. Both of you explain the system that you support or would like to see, and what revenues you suggest the state use to pay for it. And Justin, you start.
Yeah, I am a big proponent of Medicare for all. This is an issue at the federal level that has trickled down to municipalities for us to figure out how to help our communities. Comptroller Lembo has talked about single payer option for decades now, probably the last 12 years under Malloy. Then again, the conversations percolated with Representative Scanlon and himself. We can have the Connecticut option to allow our undocumented community members to be covered, make sure we're increasing benefits and lifting the caps for Husky. That's the way that we need to go. In the long run, it's going to save us money. We have the ability to do it. We have the resources. And in fact, we are going to do it. And with Aetna threatening us, people got cold feet.
George?
So this is healthcare is an issue that I've been fighting for 25 years. I'm a big believer in high quality, affordable healthcare for everyone. It's something that we struck over at Stop and Shop with 35,000 workers last year. I also have some pretty personal experiences with this. Some medical emergencies in my family where, thank God, we have really good healthcare and we're able to get good care and not pay almost nothing. So healthcare should be a right, and it needs to be. The leadership of Sean Scanlon and Matt Lesser on this issue has been remarkable. As you know, they hit a wall. It's something I plan on partnering with them on and championing. We have got to solve this. I meet too many families on the doors while I'm campaigning who are struggling. They are almost bankrupt in some cases because of the medical bills they have to pay. And if they do have plans, the deductibles are too high, the premiums are too high, the coverage tends to be bare bones, doesn't include vision and dental. So I think we need to tackle this. Healthcare should be a right, and it can be a right here in Connecticut if we get it right.
Okay. This question is to you both. It has to do with COVID-19. With COVID-19 and its economic fallout, we hear a lot of talk about moratoriums on rents and mortgages, yet COVID remains a threat. Those bills aren't erased. It's just that the due date has been moved. What would you do to alleviate the financial strain people are under in terms of paying rent and mortgages? And we'll start off with Mr. Cabrera.
Yeah, this is an issue I'm running across a lot on the doors. We need to protect people who are most vulnerable in our society. This is a principle I've been dedicated to for 25 years of my life, working in the labor movement. And we need to really look at not only extending some of these moratoriums, but in some cases forgiving them, because people are going to be out of a home. They're not going to have a place to live. And that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable in one of the richest states in the country. That's unacceptable on every level. As a human being, as a matter of public policy, COVID-19 has exposed what I have known for a long time, and I know many people have here today. The gross and radical income inequality in this state has just been torn off, and COVID-19 has exposed it. Before COVID-19, many families, many middle-class families, were one emergency away from bankruptcy or being out on the street. And it's high time that we start to tackle these large gaps in income inequality and invest in jobs, invest in our schools, invest in our people again. That's what this campaign is about.
And in terms of forgiving a mortgage or a rent, can you be a little more specific? Have you thought about what exactly should be exempt or forgiven or delayed?
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely a case to be made, especially in cases where people are not working and don't have any income coming in. I think it would be cruel to expect them to pay all that money that they're behind on. So you have to be able to balance that. People who are maybe in a better position to do that, but you've got to be human in this, and you've got to be delicate in this and do it right.
And then Justin, what would you do to alleviate the financial strain people are under from the COVID-19 economic fallout?
Yeah, we need to cancel rent. That's clear. We have people who've been out of work for 3-4 months, who many of them haven't actually received unemployment payments. I have always worked for affordable housing. The house I grew up in was on a brownfield, and my childhood house sunk into the ground. I'm not just talking about it; I'm about it. In the 25 years that I've existed, I've always fought to have affordable housing because I know what it does. It is the resting part. It is the bare minimum that you need to be successful. We should be moving like New York, rather upstate New York, who has pushed the federal government, had a declaration to say, you need to do your jobs. It is not reasonable to say that people should have had 3 months of rent, utility, and food saved up. That is not a fair expectation. That is not in reality. And that is obfuscating our responsibilities as elected leaders.
Thank you, Justin.
And then, Justin, a follow-up, you had mentioned, I believe you said forgiving rents for people who are renting, say, an apartment. What about the landlord? Like in Durban, Ansonia, we have 2 and 3 family houses all over the place, and the owner may live in this. What would you forgive mortgages for them or only the renters?
Yeah, the state should have a program to reimburse renters. My family, we have a rental property. If we don't get paid, we don't eat. I get that, but we're talking about the people first in need. They're the ones who don't have assets. They don't have collateral. 170,000 of them are going to be out August 22nd.
Thank you.
And one last question, because we are about out of time. A solar developer is planning to clear cut about 15 acres of forest in northern Hamden in order to provide power to Gateway Community College and Southern Connecticut State University. Hamden's Planning and Zoning Department has come out against the project because it would require the clear cutting a lot of forest. But the town does not have control over the project because it will go to the state siting council to approve or deny. Neighbors are also opposed. Clean energy is a priority for both of you. Would you join neighbors in fighting this project? Sorry, Justin, you answer first.
Yes. There is a letter that I have signed on to. It is something that, people have talked about. I have talked to people. I've talked to, representatives, talked to Senator Winfield about this. The siting council is the one who has the authority over this. So I know Rep. Reyes has been fighting this in Bridgeport, not Bridgeport, Waterbury, and has been talking about communities need to have more insight about what type of developments come to their communities before it lands in their backyards. We need to have a process for the siting council where community members can advocate and their voices can be heard before a process and a program moves along and developers are able to start that process without informing and having real community conversations.
Thank you. And George?
Absolutely. You cannot be on the side of justice, economic justice, environmental justice, or anything else unless you're on the side of the people. And the people's voices need to be heard. There should be, the Planning and Zoning Board has spoken in a way, in a very significant way. They are an extension of the voice of the people they are uphold to represent, and they've said no. And that should be respected. I've talked to some of the neighbors in their neighborhood, and they are pretty adamant about not having that in their neighborhood, and rules have to change, especially if a siting council can overrule the wishes of a neighborhood and a governing body in that town. So absolutely, I stand with those neighbors.
Thank you. And we are out of time. It is 2 minutes to 8. We flipped another coin before this, and Justin is going to give his closing statement first. Justin, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank y'all for hosting this, putting this together. I've been looking forward to debate for some time now. On August 11th, I'm going to ask people to come out and support me, not because I feel as an individual I have these amazing abilities, but because We have a community. This is a grassroots campaign. We have almost 200 volunteers putting in one shift a week to help out and build and have change. I am the fourth oldest person on my campaign. If we are going to change anything in this region where the average person is 56 years old, it is to make sure that we preserve it for the future. This community has 3 generations, most people on average, living in their homes, 3 generations. I want to pass on that wealth. My mother bought our house. She bought the rental property next to us and has been fighting to hold on to it. And I hope to pass that on to my children and give them the same chance in the American dream. I am a son of an immigrant. I'm a Black man. I am disabled. I've been fighting for my life, all my life. And I will make sure to put that same vigor and energy to make sure to fight for the Valley. It's been undercounted. It has the same issues as I do. It has always had the same issues. And we need people and we need communities to come together to find the solutions. It can no longer be scapegoating to say it's the city's problems or the rural area or the suburbs. The issue is those who have been our leaders in Hartford have not done what they need to do. And we can't keep doing the same thing we've done for the last 25 years and expect for different solutions. So voting for me is voting for those solutions, working with someone who will bring that energy and make sure to hold elected officials accountable. Because if we don't do it for ourselves, we have to at least do it for our kids. So whether we're talking about climate change and the fact of the tornado that's ripped through our communities, whether we're talking about police brutality or whether we're talking about high mill rates, I am the person with the most experience to work on these issues, and I always will continue to work on them. And I look forward to joining that partnership with y'all on August 11th.
Thank you, Justin. George, your closing remarks.
Thank you, Justin. Sorry, excuse me, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Eugene, for putting it together. Thank you, Councilman Farmer, for doing this as well. I appreciate you guys putting it together. Thank you for the opportunity to do that. You know, my dad came to this country as an immigrant to work hard. He had no education, but he had a strong work ethic and a strong sense of family. And through lots of hard work, he sacrificed to give me opportunities he could only dream of. My mother was a sick woman who struggled with asthma most of her life. We never had good health care, but I had a lot of love and I had a lot of support. And the grace of God and their support, I was able to go to college and get a degree in political science and government from Quinnipiac University. And I went on to dedicate the last 25 years of my life working for making sure that workers get into the middle class because they remind me of my parents. And that's what this election is about. I ran last time and received over 18,000 votes. This year, we're going to win because the values that I have that I came from my father, I came from my parents who worked so hard are the values of this district. We need to fight for better public schools that are fully funded. We need to fight to make sure everyone knows that healthcare is a right and not just a privilege for those few. We need to make sure those at the top pay their fair share. We need to make sure that one job is enough and that people can put food on the table and provide for their families and know that their children and their grandchildren will have opportunities they could only dream of. That's what this race is about. That's what I'm about. So thank you so much. And on August 11th, I ask for your vote.
Thank you both so much for joining us. That's our debate. For those listening, thank you. And remember to vote on August 11th. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe travels. Thank y'all. Thank you, Harry.